So welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally, and this particular playlist is about people who have been impacted by suicide. I have on the conversation with me Deborah Brown. Deborah's all the way from the UK. She's over the Atlantic because everybody knows I'm here in America, and she has a story to tell us. And so, Deborah, thank you for joining me in conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
So where do you want to get started in this particular conversation? Because the way I understand it, you never tried a suicide attempt, unlike
No,
myself. But suicide has impacted your life in a very specific manner because that actually got you started on a journey of
yeah,
sorts. So let's talk
absolutely.
about that. Yeah.
Goodness me. So my journey started when my mum and my sister both died. Neither of them by suicide, I might add. So my mum died by breast cancer and in 2013, and my sister died in 2016 through something that the doctors named cryptogenic liver failure. Basically, that means her liver failed and they don't know why. Um, so two very, very significant bereavements. And that really wasn't what triggered me, I suppose, looking into bereavement and how people suffer grief. What triggered was a call from a parent. I used to be a head teacher, and the parent phoned to say that they were going into palliative care. Um, and that made me think straight away, wow, that child is soon going to lose their parent. And had been through that. Um, so that sort of sent me on a bit of a journey of research. And I say a bit of a journey, I've been researching since probably 2017 how children grieve, what support there is for children, or not actually, as the case certainly, and what we're going to do about it. So the reason why I start, so what one of the reasons why we know each other is because I started to write some journals about loss in children, and one of them is about suicide. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why we sort of connected. Suicide is something that's very important to you, and how do we support people? There's all sorts of things that need to be talked about in that. The person who is thinking about taking their own life, the family around that person, the school around that family, the children in that family. And for me, children often get forgotten about. And I have to be honest, when that parent called me, I was a bit taken aback. I promised that I would look after her young person, like we do as head teachers, educators, and then realised that actually I don't have any of the skills to do that. And at the time, Keith, I'd been involved in education for 20 years in the UK at least. So that really jolted me. I thought, wow, hang on, I've been in education for 20 years. What actual qualifications and support do we have as educators to support that child who walks in the premises after the death of a loved one? After the death of a loved one by suicide, after the death of a loved one through cancer, after a sudden death of a loved one, there are so many different ways in which we could discuss the bereavement in a child. And I honestly, I'm still shocked at how little there actually is to support young people. I can't believe we're in the year 2024 and we still have so little in terms of resources. So that sort of sent me on a journey. And one of the other things that happened is somebody quite close to us took their own life. And that made me immediately think about the children that were affected by that. What do we do to support children in that situation? What are we supposed to say or not supposed to say? The adults who were significantly affected by that didn't know what to do. And certainly the adults in the school that the children attended didn't know what to do. They didn't know whether they were supposed to say the word suicide, not say the word suicide, whether they were supposed to work and support the child by talking about it or not talk about it. And I think that that's still very true. I think that practitioners still feel very much, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do. And the problem with that is when adults don't know what to do, the child does not know what to do. And we can sometimes make matters worse by saying things like, don't be sad, your grown up wouldn't want you to be sad, or at least they're not in pain anymore. Those messages are not helpful. In fact, I think they can be quite damaging, and they certainly do not validate how the child might be feeling. So that sent me on a massive journey, really, of research. What do we say? How do we support children in this situation? And as you know, I've written a few journals now. The first journal that came out was when loved ones separate, so when parents separate. So one of the things that I realised and found out in my research is that a lot of our children are dealing with grief and loss that are not grieved.
In many different ways, I assume.
Yeah, yeah. When I first started looking, I was genuinely looking for bereavement support. But what I found was support of loss. So the child who's dealing with the parents separating, the losses that child is dealing with is unbelievable when you really look into it. You know, mum might have moved out or dad's moved out or the house has to be sold and they all have to move out. The loss of the house, the loss of that safe and secure place. Sometimes you even might have to move area, therefore they'll lose the school and all that security and the friends. And I mean, the list is endless. So that was the first journal I published. The second journal I published was When a Loved One Dies by Suicide, and that's this one. Why did I do this one second? Out of what is going to be a series of at least 12 journals to support children through loss. I did this one second because it's just so incredibly important to me that children who are suffering a bereavement through a suicide are taught the right things. And one of the biggest problems when somebody takes their own life is society doesn't know what to do about it. It's so awful that the adults involved are very much in a massive, massive grief state of their own. Mm-hmm. And that leaves the child very vulnerable, very isolated, and not knowing what to do. So our journal is...
Well, before you continue, let me ask you a question. And the question is simple. Why do we not know what to do? Why isn't it human nature? And I want you to come to me with what you found in your research. Why isn't it human nature to talk about feelings and emotions?
I think that we like everything to be nice. We like to look for answers. And so we assume that there is going to be an answer. We assume that there is going to be something that can fix how we feel. So when an adult looks for grief support, they are looking to be fixed. Often, I work with people on one-to-one support for their grief. Often people will say to me, I need you to fix me. And one of the first things I will say to them is, you are not broken, you are grieving. And I think that because grief is such a difficult thing to have to go through, those of us that have to go through grief looking for any way to not feel that bad. Anything to help us not feel that bad. That's why people turn to alcohol to numb the pain, to drugs to numb the pain. Some people might be obsessed with exercising to take the minds off it, to numb the pain. There's so many different things that people might do in an attempt to help themselves not feel that bad. And so for me, one of the things about society is we look for answers, we look to be fixed, we do not look inward. Why am I feeling how I'm feeling? What can I do to help myself feel better? And I think sometimes that's about looking back at the relationship with the person that we've lost. What was that? You know, for me, grief is the result of love and of lost love. So when my mum died, suddenly I was so sad because I couldn't make that call anymore. I couldn't pick up the phone and tell her what one of the children might have said that was really funny, or how well one of them did at school, or how great a day I'd had, or how not so great a day I'd had. And those were the things that I had been so used to doing. So straight away, my grief was on show for people in a sense that I was crying. Mm-hmm. But of course, one of the big things about society is when we cry, what's the first thing we do?
As a society to the person?
Usually. What do we normally do? If you were to cry in front of me now, what's the first thing you are likely to do or say to me?
Again, I'm in a different space now, but typically any type of emotion that's not, like you said, happy or joyful or anything like that is criticized and often critiqued or belittled.
Yeah. So we usually apologize. So if we cry in front of somebody, the first thing most people do is say they're sorry. I'm sorry. You know, and the I'm so sorry. If I lost control in this conversation and needed to cry, one of the first things I would do is apologize. That's what we are primed and taught in society.
What we're doing, I've done that before.
Yeah,
I've apologized
absolutely.
for my own emotion.
Many people do it. And of course, when we do that, we're giving a message to the child that crying is something to be sorry for, that crying is wrong. Mm-hmm. Because when we say sorry, it's usually because we've done something wrong. Yeah. And so in answer to your question, I do really think that a lot of the reasons why we are not good at dealing with grief is because there are so many tools that we've been given that are absolutely rubbish and do not help us.
True.
You know, things that people say to us that are not helpful at all. You know, as I said before, the don't be sad. Your parent wouldn't want you to be sad. How do they know? And also in terms of that don't be sad message, and there's many others. Mm-hmm. It's invalidation all the time from society. And for me, what that is it's the person saying, I don't know how to deal with your grief because I don't have the tools. So I'm going to tell you not to be sad. Don't be sad because if you're sad in front of me, I don't know what to do about it. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, you know what, how can I help you in your current grief? And you know, one of the best things you can do is just listen. Just listen to the person who is sad. Just let them tell you how they feel. You know, how many times do we get to a point where somebody has died and it's been a few months and the funeral is finished, and things have moved on.
Life has moved on.
Life moves on. And all of a sudden, no one talks about that person who's died. Mm-hmm. My mum died over 10 years ago. She was a very, absolutely massive part of my life, and I still talk about her regularly. And I know that that makes some people feel uncomfortable because they don't understand that it's okay to still talk about the person who's died.
Mm.
In fact, those of us who are grievers want that to happen because we want the validation that, you know what, that person existed and was very important to us. And for me, we have to teach this to the children, because if we can teach it to the children, we change the course of the messages in our society. And we have got to do that in order to move forward in the world of grief and get death, dying, and loss on the curriculum in our schools, talked about in society as a normal response to the life cycle. We're none of us getting out of here.
Well, it's unique that you said that for those of us who grieve, and then my immediate, reaction to that, well, we will all lose somebody. We will all, well, in a sense, sometimes my dog Benji died last year of cancer. I have lost my dad to a heart attack 12 years ago. We will all lose somebody, whether it be our parents or our children or our siblings or our grandmother. It's a part of life. And typically, I don't know in the UK, but in America, we have this adage: there's two things that are constant in our world: death and taxes. So we got to pay one, and we have to grieve the other.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your book. I'm really interested in your book because I want to promote it and get it in the hands of schools here in America as best as I can. I don't know how to, I don't have a plan, but we need to talk about your book. Show me your book again. And let's take a deep dive into it. So tell us how this book came about. I understand you did research on grieving a loss, and we got the backstory. But what is this particular book focused on?
So this is specifically about when a loved one dies by suicide. Okay, and we use the term when a loved one dies by suicide because we think, well, I've worked with schools, several schools who contact me in the UK, where a child or a member of the community has taken their own life. And one of the first lessons is that we use the term died by suicide, not committed suicide. That's really important because the term committed suggests a crime.
Yeah.
And certainly in the UK, I know there are some states in America where suicide is still considered a crime. But in the UK, it is not considered a crime. It is considered a mental health need. And so we are now trying to educate people to change their language to use the term died by suicide or taking their own life. I still prefer died by suicide.
And I think that's as part of the community, I guess we'll call it that, is trying to change the vernacular, the vocabulary around, how we use words appropriately. So I totally understand.
Yeah. And to be honest, that's the case in a lot of the journals that I'm writing. A lot of the things that I want to do is to change the language that we're using around death and around how we support children. So in this book, there is nothing written that suggests the person has gone over a rainbow bridge, or I even try to avoid the term passed away, just because young people find it incredibly difficult to understand some of the adult language that we use.
Okay.
And children in particular don't always understand that death is absolute. So a child under 5 will not understand that death is absolute. So they might believe that their grown up will come back And it's really important that we get this right. So give you an example of a story, actually, where a child, a colleague contacted me and said that there'd been a really sad situation where the child's parent had died. And and this young person was then in the care of a family member. And when parents' evening was advertised and was coming around, the child thought that their parent was going to be there because it was parents' evening. And I think that that's just one example of many examples that I can give where the child didn't understand what parents' evening was about, what was going to happen. There was an excitement from the child that their parent might be there. How sad is that? That we getting it so wrong as adults that the child thought that their grown-up was going to be there. So that isn't anybody's fault, but it's just an example of language that we get wrong. So in here, taking a deep dive, I'll show you a couple of pages. So it starts by talking about statements that are true for you and your family before the suicide, before the person died by suicide. So there are some sort of little phrases, I suppose you would call them, where the child can circle. So, for example, they seemed happy, or they seemed sad, or they cried often, or they spent time alone, or they always showed love. And these are just a few examples. The idea is that the examples are there to aid the child's thought process. There are some colouring in pages with quotes throughout the book, like breakers really, but also good for mindfulness colouring in. So the little messages, they're not alone.
So let me ask you, is the book focused on activities to help a parent or an adult work with a child to help them facilitate the grieving process?
Yes.
Okay.
Throughout the book, we talk about trusted adults. So your trusted adult might be able to help you. So there's a page at the front here where the child can decide who their trusted adult is.
Okay.
So who is that person that's going to sit with the child and work through some of the activities with them? Some children will be able to pick the book up and work through it on their own.
Sure.
Some children will need some adult guidance, and I think that depends on all sorts of things. So that's why there is that trusted adult page. Who are the trusted adults? It might be somebody in school, it might be somebody in home, it might be an auntie, it might be an uncle, all those, these are all sorts of possibilities.
Well, let me ask you a question with that in mind. Is it a recommendation or a suggestion that there be an adult available for a child, even if they're saying, I don't need one or don't want one, as they work through this book?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a good question. And I think that, to be honest, if somebody's going to buy this book, so if someone's going to go to Amazon and look for this book, in my opinion, that person is already a trusted adult, because they've already decided that this is going to be a useful tool for either their child or somebody else's. So that's good. We are, though, it's really odd that you've started the conversation asking about trusted adults and those sorts of pages. I am working on a lesson plan guide to go with the journal, simply for anyone who might just want a little bit more guidance in terms of those tricky conversations that that will inevitably happen. There's no might about it, will inevitably happen when we're talking about something as sensitive as suicide. Just to give the adult a little bit more background, a little bit more of, I suppose guidance is the right word, in terms of what to say or what not to say.
Can we
Um,
talk about that a little bit? I know you've mentioned it before, things not to say. Are there things that are critically inappropriate that would be more harmful than good when talking about death by suicide to a child?
it's a great question, and I think that, in my opinion, talking about it is the answer.
Well, we
Not talking
recognize that,
about it is more
but even
detrimental.
I know a colleague out in California, her husband died by suicide, and in that she found that as her close, companions, friends, loved ones, saying the wrong thing is critically damaging,
Absolutely agree.
even as an adult. So I would assume more damaging as a child.
Yeah, yeah. So in the book, we've actually got a few pages where the child can write down some of the things that people might say that are not helpful to them, and some of the things that they might say that are helpful. So we said earlier, for example, they're not in any pain anymore, or at least they're not suffering. So I'm just trying to find that page. So messages of support pages are here,
Okay.
and the messages of not support, unhelpful messages, and it's inevitable that children will hear unhelpful messages. So you need to be strong now.
Mhm.
This actually happened in a one-to-one support that I was doing with a young person a few years ago. Dad had died by suicide, and mum was saying to the child, "You need to be strong now, you're the man of the house." The child was 9. So I had a word with that parent and spoke to that grown up and said, think about the language that you're using
Mhm.
in terms of you're the man of the house now. And what do you think your young person is thinking about that? The pressure that that puts on a child's shoulders is massive. They think they're not allowed to cry. They think they're not allowed to show any sign of emotion. Often they think that they have to do certain chores. One young person that I worked with thought that they needed to get a job because sometimes the financial situation that can happen when somebody dies is massive.
Mhm.
So if a child is then told that they've got to be the man of the house or they've got to be strong, really not helpful, is it?
They have an
So
image and picture of what that looks like to them. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
another one I wrote, you should be grateful for the time you had together. Should we? Well, that might be the case. We might be grateful, but that doesn't mean it's not sad now that they're no longer with us.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of unhelpful things and unhelpful messages that happen and that are said. So the way the book works is I do a page with my examples, and then the child gets to write theirs. So I call it a teach do, my turn, your turn. And that's sort of the way I've done the book, my turn, your turn. And that is purposeful so that we're not necessarily relying all the time on that trusted adult. The whole idea of the journal is so that the child can have a space for themselves to write about how they feel. I am aware that there'll be some children who need that adult support, but the idea is that that's a dip in and out of. So sometimes I might need to go and speak to my trusted adult because I'm stuck on this page, but other times I want to be able to get on with it without having to go and ask that adult.
Now, typically, I know that any child would benefit from that type of activity, but that book looks very focused to young children. What's the age bracket that you are specifically focused on regarding that book?
About 7 to 11.
Okay.
So um, I think that any younger than 7 and the child might not really understand some of the language
Okay.
without additional support. I think any older than 11, we need to start to think about teen journals And we are working on that behind the scenes, a
Okay.
set of journals for the older child. But you can imagine, so each of these journals takes around 6 to 8 weeks to write and get the graphics done. I don't do the graphics. I start off some of it. We sometimes chat about what do we want it to look like. But my graphic designer happens to be my brother, and he is a genius. So all of these little monsters, they're all, I can't take any credit for that.
I think we talked offline or prior to this conversation that you may be thinking about making plush toys or
Oh
something to that
yeah,
effect.
Did I tell you that? Can't remember. Yeah, so the idea long term is that they become a care package.
Okay.
So what and we don't know what that's going to look like yet. I just got big ideas. Because I know that young people will need that type of thing.
Mhm.
This little guy here, we're trying to get him made into a plush toy, and that will be the case on all of them. So you mentioned about pets dying, funnily enough, that was our 3rd journal published. So we're going to make him into a plush toy too.
Okay.
So we now have 3 published journals. There's the 3rd one, bright orange. So you'll notice he doesn't change; he just changes color. And so,
Can I ask about that?
he's like our little mascot.
So where can we find this book? I think it's on Amazon, yes?
Yes, it's available on Amazon at the moment. I have got a few charities and retailers interested in a couple of the journals already. So any wholesale orders need to come directly to me, really.
Okay.
So we can talk to wholesale prices.
And so with that, what is the next step in helping people, young people specifically, who have lost a loved one by suicide?
So, well, hopefully this book is the one that we're focusing on for the first set of care packages.
Okay.
So at the moment, I'm working with a company who are going to try and make the plush toy for me and lots of other things. We've got a set of stickers that children love stickers. The reason why I know about the stickers, by the way, is I've been to a couple of schools and talked to the children about the different journals. So the stickers will be sort of similar in size to these, and you can use the stickers to over stick, or they can colour them in. Probably most children will probably do a bit of a mixture. All sorts of ideas I've got. So that's for the suicide journal in particular. The long-term plan is to keep writing. So I'm about to publish when a loved one is seriously ill.
Okay.
And when a loved one is terminally ill will come shortly after that. I was doing seriously ill. It got too big. There was so much needed to go in that I decided to split it into 2. And then we are going to start when a grandparent dies and so on. There's a list, lots. Every time I publish one, Keith, somebody contacts me and says, "Have you got?"
Yeah.
Which is wonderful because it means people need it. But usually it's yes, but it's still in my head. So yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time, but we're determined to get these out there. It's so desperately needed.
And I'm determined with every power that I got to help you too. And so it is definitely needed. Deborah, thank you for this conversation, and I always appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening.